Hey everyone. Before we start the show this week, I wanted to share with you guys a quick review and a text message that I received about episode 29, Fight or Flight. And the message goes like this: I loved your episode so much. I love how you shed light on the fact that not all abuse has to be physical. It took a lot of courage and bravery. I'm so proud of you. I love that you and your ex are now in a healthy space and that you guys were able to hash that shit out. You're an amazing woman, and never think that having a panic attack or anxiety about a situation makes you any less strong or courageous. That's what makes us the dope ass people that we are. Shit triggers me all the time, and sometimes I react amazing, and sometimes but that doesn't change the person I am or the growth I've had. But nonetheless, I appreciate your rawness and I love you. To my baddie, my fellow podcaster, you know who you are. Thank you so much for that message. It means more to me than you can possibly imagine. And I wanted to open up with this feedback because I am here today with a one-woman show that you guys tune in every week, and it is giving a voice to a platform and discussing everything and anything that others may want to hear about, that others may want to discuss. And that is the purpose of having a podcast, at least for me. And so if you are someone who wants to have your own podcast, or you have one and you want to rebrand, this is your chance. Idea to Launch Academy is still live, and you still have time to enroll. Coach Carla Amaris has the self-paced course. They're available to anybody who just needs to take a little bit of their time, and she also has the intensive course. It is still open for enrollment right now. So this is your chance. Go to my show description, go to my affiliate code, click on that link and go sign up. You can launch your podcast within 30 days, and you will be just like me every single week, giving a platform with a mic and a voice to all your listeners. Get your show started. I also wanted to share with you guys that this week's episode, which you are tuned into, might be a little bit of a trigger for some of my listeners. If you are just tuning in for the first time, fair trigger warning. This week's episode highlights a lot of the systemic issues and injustices with immigration, with ICE, and DACA. DACA is, for those who don't know, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It is a program intended to allow undocumented immigrants who were brought to the U.S. as minors to legally remain in the country to study or to work. And so I wanted to shine some light on this, as this hits a little bit home to me, to my family, in the sense of immigration. And so with that being said, I hope that you can open up your mind, open up your heart, and enjoy the show. Welcome to Double Dose of Raw Talk Podcast. I am your host, Miss T. On this weekly show, you will tune in to discussions of different topics about today's society, culture, and adulthood. Of course, there's always juicy conversation with a little bit of love and plenty of sex. And let's not forget the stories of all relationships and the mess with relationships. Join me every week along with my friends and guests to get your dose and keep it raw on everything and anything. And remember, no topic is off limits. All right. Okay, here we go. Welcome back, everyone, to another week and another episode on Double Dose of Raw Talk Podcast. I am your host, Miss C, and today I am joined by two very special guests who I am going to allow themselves to introduce who they are to you, my listeners, and to the rest of the world. Welcome, guys. Who wants to go first to introduce yourselves?
I guess I'll go first since I'm the oldest. So, hi everyone. My name is Bernie,
Okay.
and I am here with my younger sister.
Okay. And the younger sister, please.
My name is Emilia, and I'm the little one of the family. I don't know. I'm a New York City high school teacher. I'm 30 years old, and I'm so happy to be here with my big sister.
Nice. And Bernie, do you want to give us a little bit of background if you like?
Oh, yeah, sure. So I also live here in New York City and I work as a paralegal for a personal injury law office. I've been doing this for almost 7 years now.
Sweet.
And yeah, pretty much it. I'm
Awesome.
not gonna say my age because I'm the oldest, but yeah.
By 1 year. So.
Well, you guys are definitely younger than me, so let me just say that. But guys, I have seen both ladies and absolutely wonderful and beautiful and very young. I must say that. Okay, so I would have
Oh,
never
thank
given
you.
you guys anywhere near 30. So yes, we're gonna go with that. But just to enlighten all of my listeners, this week's episode is very personal and it's very close to my heart, something that my listeners are very well aware of when it comes to me and my background. I am born in this country, but I come from immigrant parents. And so this is definitely a topic I've wanted to tackle and bring on this platform to have a very raw discussion on it and just have it be very direct. And so I was lucky enough to have known of Bernie and Emilia through a mutual friend. And, kudos to her. She knows who she is. and, it was kind of like me just looking for two people primarily, one to two people primarily around my age that can really speak on the topic of immigration and DACA and what we've recently, but in actuality has been happening for quite some time. I just think there's a lot more light shined on it with a lot of other movements in recent years and in recent times. The situation going on with the families being separated, so many being deported for pretty much any reason at all. And I wanted to be able to bring some light to this because anybody knows Double Dose of Raw Talk platform and Miss D. I am very supportive, very huge on a lot of the many different movements that are still going on today. And this being one of them. There's a hashtag abolish eyes. There's a hashtag so many surrounding this issue. And I'm going to call it an issue because I do feel it is an issue. And so
Mhm.
that's the formal introduction to this. But if anybody also knows how to start my episodes, I always start with a little bit of an icebreaker, right? So we are going to start with that. And in essence, we are actually recording during the month and celebration of Hispanic Heritage, Latinx Heritage Month. And so that is between September 15th through October 15th, and it actually highlights the independence of a few of the Central American countries. And in light of that, I wanted to shine light on, some things about some of our Latin American countries. And I wanted to play a tiny, tiny game, being that we're going to dive into a serious topic. And I wanted to title the icebreaker Guess the Country, right? So I don't know exactly you guys' background or how well versed you are in all these Latin American countries and their foods, but I'm going to
Uh-oh.
give you guys some foods that I happen to like. And let's see how much fun we can have with you guys guessing the country of origin.
Oh boy.
Listen, we're going to give the listeners a menu here, and they're probably gonna write things down or reference it back and go to some form of a restaurant to get these foods because they're really really good. All right, so the first one I'm going to tell you guys about is called pupusas.
Oh, I know that one. That's in Salvador,
Yes,
right? I knew that one.
she knew that one.
They're very good.
They're very good.
They're very
Oh my God, they're
good.
so good. Okay, so for my listeners, pupusas very quickly is a thick griddle cake or flatbread. It's mostly in El Salvador and Honduras, and it's made with cornmeal or rice flour. And it is by far one of the most delicious things I've ever had in my life.
Hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
they make it with cheese. They make it with beans. They make it with meat and beans. I mean, there's a whole store locally here. If anybody wants to come visit Daisy in the Bronx, yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. Bernie, you said they're really good. Is it one
Yes.
of like your favorite delicacies in the Latin American cuisine or not?
It is. I usually enjoy food overall, period. There's not much to do with that. Just feed me and I'll be happy. And the first time I tried pupusas, it was when I was in high school and I was just over the top. But unfortunately in Brooklyn where I live,
Mm-hmm.
I can't find like a restaurant, like a Salvadorian or Honduran restaurant that sells them. So I haven't had them in a while,
Oh,
and it's very, very sad.
oh, we have
But
one.
yes, it's one of my favorites.
We have
Yes.
one like 10 minutes from here, Bernie. I kid you not. I'm gonna give you that
Oh my
address. Yes,
God.
it's deadly. It's right off the train. So if I ever want to get off the train and just go get, I could rack up on these things. It's terrible. It's terrible. All right, the next one. The next meal, well, food, I should say, is enchiladas.
Oh, Mexican.
Yes, Mexican. Have you guys had them?
Yes.
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 Actually, when we just, came to New York, we we had so many like Mexican families almost take care of us.
Okay.
So we're kind of well versed in their food. They have amazing food.
Yes. So I have a
Wow.
confession, guys. I had an enchilada for the first time, I want to say like 3 years ago. I'm going to be 35.
Oh my God, you've been missing out your whole life.
What have I been missing my whole life? And here's the kicker. One of my cousins is married to a Mexican man. You would think I would have had some form of an exposure to enchiladas. I have not. Enchiladas, to my listeners, is corn tortilla rolled around a filling and covered with a savory sauce. I may just post like a group
Hmm.
of pictures of all these foods that I'm like talking
Yeah,
about
you
in this
should.
episode because my listeners are going to be like, Deezy, what is wrong with you? Like, you're making us hungry here. So yeah, that's part of my confession of this week. I think that's all I'm confessing for this week. That's it. Yeah, I just had an enchilada for the first time. All right, the next one is called baleadas.
Oh my God, you got me
Hey,
there. Baleadas.
I've
Baleadas.
heard of this.
I don't know what that
It's in my
is.
brain somewhere.
But it's resonating with you.
It is.
So I've
I feel like once you say it, I'm gonna be like, oh
Oh
yeah.
yeah, okay. So I'm gonna say it. A baleada is a traditional Honduran dish composed of flour tortilla filled with
Mm,
mashed fried red beans, thick cream Honduran butter, and crumbled hard salty cheese. I don't know where to find this,
wow.
but I'm in a search of it because I've never heard of it. It intrigued me to look at it. The picture looks good, and so I'm on a mission to find it. I am. I thought I was the only one who never heard of it. It makes me feel good that they were a little bit confused too.
No, I've never.
Never.
Yeah, no, I've
Okay.
never heard of it. It sounds delicious.
It does sound
That
delicious.
sounds very good.
Okay, so fair enough. The next one is called Gallo Pinto. Now,
What?
let me confess something, guys. I confused it with pico de gallo, which is mostly Cuban, but this is it says gallo pinto, and it's different, and and it's mostly served in like completely different countries aside from Cuba. So no takers, no guesses.
I have
Okay,
no idea.
so this
I have
is
no idea.
this one's actually predominantly served in Nicaragua and Costa Rica, and it consists of
Mm,
rice and beans as the base. And it just looks like a whole fun filled meal with a bunch of chopped peppers, bell peppers, onions, and garlic all over it. So it just looks like a messy fun fest, but it looks very delicious, which is why I confused it with pico de gallo.
pico de gallo.
That's why. So I'm definitely going to have to post pictures because I'm pretty sure my listeners are hungry right now. Okay.
Oh yeah.
The
No,
next
yeah.
one is called arepa.
That's Colombian, no?
Yes, it's Colombian.
I
Wait.
feel like your listeners will be judging us. Like right
I
there.
think so too. They were like, come on.
Come on, these girls.
Come on, guys. How do you not know this? Everybody serves arepa. Arepa is very much so Colombian, which is funny because I had this icebreaker set since I sent you guys the agenda, and I just had an amazing and delicious Colombian meal yesterday after a brunch, which is mostly just like cold cuts and drinks, which were very good. But
Mhm.
I went to a Colombian restaurant out in Queens because every time I'm out in Queens, I have to stop by a Colombian restaurant and have a very good
Mhm.
traditional Colombian meal. And so I did, and I
Mhm.
definitely enjoyed that arepa, guys. Arepa is a type of food made of ground, basically it's like maize dough, and it originates from South America, mostly Colombian. It's just by far the most delicious thing ever. Again, I will share pictures of it. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to mention the last two. And the one I'm going to mention now is very dear to me. And the very last one I'm going to mention is just probably dear to every New Yorker, maybe, possibly. I don't know. So, the next one is the one that's very dear to me, and it is called hornado.
Oh, that's us. That's Ecuador.
Yeah.
All over it.
It is Ecuador. Um, Basically, what I'm going to do, listeners, is I'm going to post a picture of my mother's Sunday meals because it's exactly what we have every
Oh,
Sunday in this house. Every
oh,
Sunday. Shout out to Chato.
so good.
Every Sunday, that woman
So
cooks.
good.
Every Sunday. So if you are basically looking for something that is not vegetarian, Ecuador has it, or my mother's house. It is basically roasted pig, carved with freshly and served with fried plantains, salad, or tasty traditional fried potato cakes. It's a whole snack in a picture. So I'm gonna have to show it to you
Yes.
guys so you understand how delicious this thing is. Okay,
Yes.
and the last one is mango.
Dominican.
Dominican. Now listen, I just have to say this. Out of all, I mean, you just literally, it just hits the spot. Like, mango is a popular side dish from Dominican Republic. And it is five elements: boiled and mashed green plantains, eggs, fried cheese, fried Dominican salami, and onions sauteed in vinegar. Now,
Mm,
this is like one of those meals that I learned to have waking up on a Sunday or a Saturday,
yeah.
mostly hungover. I'm not gonna lie.
Yes,
I'm not
that
gonna
is so
lie.
true.
Mostly hungover, and it's funny to me because Ecuadorians also have like certain similar dishes that you mostly just eat hungover. So,
Right.
for me, in my opinion, I just find those meals to be like the best ones. And now mango is just
Yeah.
part of sometimes like at least once every 6 weeks of a dish for me. I have to have it. It's delicious.
Oh, so good.
Definitely
It's
good.
so good.
Definitely delicious. All right. So that was the icebreaker. It's a little fun moment
Yay.
just to go through some meals. I think it's nice to also enlighten and with Latinx, Hispanic Heritage Month, and just I mean, food, right? They always say like the way to someone's heart. I mean, not someone, usually a man's heart, but to someone's heart, it is through their stomach. And so why not open it up that way, right? So
Yeah.
the reason why I wanted to open it up that way is because I also wanted to shine light to, some of the beautiful things to Latin Americans. And yes, the fact is that we do live in a country where, you guys have heard probably the phrase of it being a melting pot because
Mhm.
there's historically so many immigrants that have come to this country. And so we're going to go dive right into my first segment, which is As Raw as It Gets. My listeners already know how this segment works, but usually during this segment is where we tackle things that are controversial, culture stuff, social media, news, sometimes a little bit of relationships and, sex and love. But today, that's not it. Today, we're going to focus on social media and the news, not so much news updates or breaking news, but in essence, the topic of DACA and immigration. So I wanted to dive into, with both you ladies, being able to define to my listeners your understanding and how it's affected you, what DACA is. And I want to shine some light. You know, maybe you know what? I'll save it for the second segment because in the second segment, I want to be a little petty to this country. But if you guys could just, go into conversation with me about, Daisy's a little petty today, about what DACA is and how it has impacted you guys.
uh, Sister, do you want to take that lead?
Yeah, I'll go first. I mean, DACA for me was the way that I became a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I still remember where I was when the announcement came on. And I remember my mom being there, my sister being there.
Mm-hmm.
And we were on a sofa together and we were watching the news.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being super cynical about it. I was like, so what?
Right.
I'm like, who cares?
Mm-hmm.
Because I just never expected something like that to come our way. It definitely took a long while to register and like start, you know, um, really understanding the guidelines that they were giving us, the requirements. So it took a while to set in because we just had, I think at that point almost like 15 years being undocumented, and we had tried everything possible to have an adjustment of status. So DACA, when it first came, it felt like it almost felt fake. Like I just didn't believe it. Um, and it was hard getting all the paperwork ready and trying to see a lawyer, trying to like get everything. It became like a stack of like our lives, our years and years and years living here, all put together. Um, it became very private and personal, and that was it. We sent it off, and when it came back, like it opened many doors. I became a teacher because of it. So it was definitely something that just opened a huge door for me to be what I wanted to be in terms of career. But I always say it was great in that way because it opened that door, but it definitely just didn't, it wasn't enough at that time.
Right.
And it took a while to say, like, thank you, but it wasn't enough because a lot of people were left out.
Right.
So for me, I guess it was that stepping stone, it was that opportunity. But I know for a lot of people now with DACA. So I had an adjustment of status. I'm able, I have my green card now. But if I had DACA, I would be experiencing what a lot of people are experiencing, which my sister can take over and go into that. It's the sense of uncertainty because I'm hearing that a lot of people that are applying for DACA now, they're only getting it for a year. The fees to apply for it is going up. So they're experiencing a lot of blockage and a lot of obstacles, and it's because DACA was just never meant to be something stable.
Right.
It never was.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Amelia. I really appreciate it. Bernie, do you want to share with us a little bit of how DACA affects you and what's your life with or without it?
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, same. I remember sitting on the sofa watching the news when it first got announced, and my feelings were exactly the same as my sister's. Maybe it was a little deeper because she did end up applying for it before I did. And I remember at the time when it was announced, it was my second to last semester in college. And I was going to school for my accounting degree. And for those who either pursued or are planning to pursue accounting, you know that experience is everything when you want to get out to the field and find a job. And these internships or part-time jobs always require that you had papers, that you had a social security number. And so I couldn't take advantage of that. And I felt cheated when it came out. I felt like it was too late for me because I wasn't able to take advantage of DACA in a way that it would allow me to file or apply for these internships that would allow me the experience that then when I finished my college career I could get a decent job. So I felt like all my years of college and all the sacrifice by my parents and my sister and my own were kind of like for nothing. So I was even more cynical than my sister was at that time. And I didn't want anything to do with it. I was just like, I'm ready to go back home. Just send me back home. And that's where I have to check my privileges because I have that option to go back home and have somewhere to go. Even if I'm unfamiliar with how my country is now, I have that option. I have my whole family there. I will have a support system.
Right.
People that are also in my situation don't always have that option. Their only option is to stay here and fight this. Right. So yeah, I remember at that time I was angry. I felt cheated, and it took a lot of my friends to convince me, and actually they raised the money for me to apply for it because money was also an issue. And the application fees they're not a couple of bucks.
Right.
So, and for some people that means rent for a month.
Absolutely.
And yeah, if it wasn't for my friends, I wouldn't have applied, and I ended up doing it. And what it did for me was it just opened the door for me to be able to apply to a decent job, if even if it wasn't my career job or my dream job
Right.
at that time. And that's how I ended up getting into the legal field, which, you know, some things happen for a reason. I don't think I would have been happy just doing numbers and computing numbers.
Mm-hmm.
um but and I'm happy with what I do now. But yes, at that time it was, I just remember being very, very angry. And right now I don't know if it's because I've been dealing this for so long, or it's because you know, I find myself stable enough to take care of myself if something happens. And, you know, meaning something happens, meaning, you know, DACA gets rescinded and then I have to go back home, where there's, you know, deportation proceedings against me because now they know who I am, where I live, where I work.
Right.
Um, so it's that fear of persecution by the government.
Right.
Um, but again, I have that choice of being able to go back home if shit hits the fan.
Right.
I have that opportunity and other people don't, and that is where it's disheartening. And it just it makes you angry.
Absolutely. You brought up
Yeah.
a good point, Bernie. Thank you so much for sharing that with me and my
Yeah.
listeners as well. You brought up a very good point. Your point that you acknowledge your privilege that you have family where to go to. There are plenty of short videos and documentaries of people who came here when they were 1, 2 years old and their whole family came. So technically, they don't have anyone home and they could easily just at any given moment be deported. How old were you guys when you came here?
I was 10 years old
Okay.
and my sister had just turned 9.
Okay. Okay. So at that point, you guys knew family over there. You guys are at an age where you can at least remember a tiny bit. And even then, there's still a little bit of fear, right? That if and I appreciate you saying, oh, at least I have family there. At least I have this. But essentially, this is the only country. This is the only home you've really known, considering how long you've been here. And so, when we talk about the fear of it, I don't think a lot of society understands that when it comes to DACA and it comes to the youth, and that's what I'm going to call them. I'm going to call the youth, uh,
Hmm.
who who some essentially depend on that to be able to stay here and to be able to continue with what they call their dreams. It's not as easy as just saying build a wall and send everybody back home. It's not as easy as just saying deport everyone who was not born here, right? What
Hmm.
are your use guys personal story as far as, and I'm very huge on this and I will share with you guys a little later why. How has your
Hmm.
experience been as far as like the law goes and the system as it pertains to being undocumented? Meaning, when we speak of that fear of having to go back home, well, how was the fear living here? Like, did you guys grow up as soon as you got here knowing that you had to be maybe careful or knowing that there was a little bit of cautions that had to be taken from your end? Or how was it growing up with family members also being immigrants here?
Right. So when my sister and I came, my dad had actually been here for a year before my mom, my sister, and I were brought.
Beautiful.
And yes, and again, we have to check our privilege in that sense because we got our tourist visa.
Ah,
So
okay.
we came on a plane, you know.
Yeah,
We didn't have to go through the hardship of crossing a border,
right.
which I can't even fathom what that must be like. And you know, I know people that bring their children and putting them through that. I just you have to imagine the desperation and the necessity of putting you and your children through that.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, so we had the privilege of, you know, getting on a plane and coming here. And the only family we had was an uncle from my mother's side.
Oh, wow.
So we left most of our family, our friends, everything we knew back home. And we were old enough to, you know, to have memories of our family, of our home, of our school, of our friends, of our neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
But, and I don't know if it's the same for my sister, but I don't remember understanding our status until I had to apply for college in
Mm,
high school.
okay.
So that was quite a while that I didn't have that fear. It's just, our lives renting a room with a couple of other families to save money,
Right.
and um, my parents working, you know, basic wages.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing was just a way of life. I didn't question why it was like that. I didn't compare myself to other families or to other people. That was life.
Right.
And until I got to be a senior in high school, and I had to, start thinking about college and where to apply. And then I remember very distinctly, going through my application, and there's a box that said your social security number.
Mm,
And I'm thinking like, well, what is that? Where do I find that number? Where do I get that number?
right. And just not having it, or was there even like a moment of explanation there for you to even know what that meant? It.
Right. And then I brought it up to my parents. I was like, do we have this? Because my father did have his social security number, and that was because in the 80s, he traveled here. He went to California, and he was able to get his social security number. So he had an actual social security number, a working number,
Right.
but we didn't.
Yeah.
So I had to speak to my college counselor and be very honest and frank with her. And I remember being afraid, but then at the same time, I remember thinking, I'm just a kid.
Mm,
They wouldn't hurt me. They wouldn't look down on me. They have to help me. That's what they're here for.
right.
So I was honest with my college counselor, and she's the thank thank God for her, because otherwise I wouldn't have probably gone to college, and she was the one that helped me with my application.
Amazing. And for you, Amelia, was that similarly your experience too, or how did that
Yeah,
discovery happen
it
for you?
definitely was. I've been thinking a lot about growing up with fear,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it was a more growing up displaced and
Okay.
experiencing displacement,
Mm-hmm.
which I think for me that's really what happened. Because the fear was definitely there, but I don't think it's how people imagine fear to be, like that fear that you cannot leave the door. It's a fear that kind of like lingers with you in different situations.
Mm-hmm.
It manifests itself in different situations. Like as a kid, you're afraid to speak up. You're afraid to bring your parents over to school. Parents are afraid for you to go out. Like our parents never wanted us to go out. Like as teenagers, we were always home. Even in college, we were always home, because they were always afraid that something would happen. If police is involved, then we wouldn't have the proper documents to like fend for ourselves. It manifests in academia, when you're afraid of like speaking up again, or you have that imposter syndrome when you're like a professional and you have a job, and you feel inadequate. There's like a mix of displacement, it's a mix of fear. Um, so it just like comes up in different things, like when you're not really paying attention, like it's
Mm-hmm.
something that is always with you. And I think for me, like I experienced a lot of anger. Um, and I will forever like apologize to my parents, because when I was a teenager, I was impossible. Like you can ask my sister. Um, I was always, it was a war at home. Like I had so much resentment against my parents for bringing us here. I felt like, why did you bring us here? Did you not do your research? Like we're
Mm-hmm.
going through this and it's all your fault. And life has a funny way of like making you see things that you're not able to see.
Right.
And so when finally I had to go to work after high school, because I didn't go to college right away. There was no money, there was no support from my high school. So I had to like go straight into work and save money for college.
Right.
And that's when I started working as any other undocumented person. I started working in a bakery, and I was working in the back with the ovens, and like it was a shock for me. And that's when I finally realized that everything that my parents were doing, it wasn't their fault.
Mm.
Like they just didn't know. They were also forced to come here. It wasn't like really a choice.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like a choice, but I never believed that it was, and I realized that it wasn't. Nobody wants to just up and leave.
Right.
Nobody, like I imagine my parents leaving their parents behind,
Mm.
their family and their country. They didn't want to do that, but they had to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I finally realized my parents were just trying to do their best.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no idea how they managed to get us into like, like to the doctor and
Yeah.
like get us to school. And like I was just, how did you do it with no English and like that fear of knowing that you're not here with documents? And like I learned to understand what was happening. So for me, it was like a combination of like feeling displaced. I don't belong here. That fear that you carry with you. Even now, when I have my green card, I am afraid of immigration. I'm afraid of police. I'm afraid of these authorities and figures of power. And then like for me, it was anger when I was a teenager, and I still hold a lot of anger as an adult woman, not towards my parents,
Mm-hmm.
but towards the situation
Mm-hmm.
that we're going through.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are experiencing a family separation. My parents are back home and we're here.
Right.
So the only person that's able to go see them is is me.
Right.
And so that's a huge like obstacle and like struggle that we're facing now as a family. So
Right.
it's a lot. It
Right.
really
I once again, I mean, I'm gonna probably turn blue in the face saying this, but I appreciate you guys opening up so much on this, and because I don't, I don't, I don't recall ever experiencing that level of being overprotective with me or things like that because I was born here. But I do recall my parents being very protective of my older sister because she was undocumented. And I
is.
remember my parents struggling only knowing Spanish. I remember having to constantly interpret for them in my broken English. And I'm going to say broken because when you're interpreting, it's broken. Your Spanish is broken and your English is broken because it's not like I have time to write a sentence in English for an essay. It's like I'm trying to say what they're saying in Spanish in a complete English form to somebody who's looking at us like, where are you, why are you even here? I
Right.
witnessed oftentimes my parents being discriminated against for only speaking Spanish. And little did many of these people know that their daughter was right behind them who spoke English and could defend them. I found myself constantly having to fight and argue in public with people, random people, whether it was shopping or stores, primarily with the shopping in the stores. And society just looking at my parents like they were aliens in a sense, or like, to your point of feeling displaced, they would make them feel displaced, like they just did not belong here. And so it's definitely not a good feeling to have to go through that. So I can only imagine that, plus being in both your shoes and not understanding also on your end and having to deal with all the other levels of emotions when it comes to growing up in that area, in that aspect of life, where undocumented can be a serious factor. It absolutely can. And for me, one of the reasons why I wanted to shine light on this is because I too gave my parents a hard time as a teenager, because I was a little bit of a brat. But one of the things after I realized what their status was here, I learned to appreciate them in a different way. And the only reason why it really got to me, and I don't think I've ever told them this, so I don't think they've ever realized how much it got to me, is being around 10 or 11 years old and helping them study for their citizenship test. And so it's like we would do homework together, do my homework together. I think I was actually around 10, and we used to do it with my little brother too. And then, like, literally the tables would turn, and we would have to sit there and test them and make sure they studied the questions right. And they were so nervous to prepare for this. They were so nervous to go to essentially to go to school and have to study a book and have to take this test. And you don't realize how much goes into the process of someone having to apply for essentially a permission, a green card, a pass to say, yeah, you can stay here, to do basically all you've been doing this whole time,
Right.
essentially,
Right.
you know? And that's where, for me, it was so close to home and important to bring to the forefront this type of conversation. And, you know, uh, even you guys opening up to the level that you have is greatly appreciated, because I don't think that a lot of people understand the bigger picture with immigration and DACA, and deportation. I want to segue into my next segment, which is called Double or Nothing. And this is where I wanted to, this is a segment where we keep it essentially raw on another dose. And I actually want to title this one. I didn't title the first one in the segment because I think that's exactly what I'm going to use for the title of this episode. So I don't want to give it away. But segment two, I'm going to call it Knock Knock, Who Is It? And the reason why, and it goes with what we've been discussing so far, is, with the whole thing of the fear and if something could happen, or how, Amelia, you express, being fearful of authorities, being fearful of police or immigration, just coming up, just being present somewhere. The fact is that there are agencies, essentially ICE, for example, who is going around knocking on people's doors, who are hunting our immigrant community to deport them. And I wanted to shine light on this because it's a documentary that's on Netflix right now. It's called Immigration Nation. I actually sat there and watched the entire thing.
Oh,
Uh,
you're brave.
it was a lot, but I felt like I needed to watch the entire thing because I want to be very honest about something. While I'm very well versed on a lot of the things going on surrounding these topics, I feel like there's still room for education and re-education for myself and for the community that I do essentially belong to. And because
Mhm.
actively, as we're speaking, again, there's so many movements going on in the world right now that for me, I just believe more so in unity. And so the only way we're really going to get there is if we come very well educated and well versed on these situations at hand, especially when, certain elections are right around the corner. And so I
Mhm.
just thought it was important for me to educate myself. And so I wanted to shine light on this documentary because it goes hand in hand with a lot of the stigmas that are surrounding immigrants. And, no secret to anybody, we have someone in office right now who has made it his business to reference immigrants as bad people. Because essentially, there have been cases, and there have been cases known to society where we have had some immigrants with rap sheets. We have had some immigrants with actual crimes on their name. And my big issue with that is that, you know, it's not everyone. There are immigrants here who have been doing right by society, other than they just don't have papers to be here. They have their reasons to why they had to run from their country to come here to find a better life or to be able to give a better life to the family that they're creating. And so for me to see a documentary like this, where you basically see a whole agency, which is ICE, and they're indicating in these episodes that, ever since the person in office today has put in an executive order to basically go hunt down as many immigrants as you can and let's get them deported. It was interesting to see
Mhm.
how this entire agency has moved since this executive order went into place. And it was interesting to see how essentially a lot of them would laugh about it, how essentially a lot of them saw it as a game, meeting their goals, meeting their quotas, the number that they had to
Mhm.
bring in on a daily basis. And as you saw them knock on people's doors and not presenting themselves as they should have, for example, one of the things I noted there was that they don't really have to identify themselves fully unless the other person on the other side of the door asks them to. So they initiate the interaction just by knocking and saying police. And so what usually happens when people are on the other side of the door, they don't always think, someone who's not well educated, they don't always think to ask, well, what kind of a police or where from, to get more information to see if they even have a warrant. And a lot of people, just as long as they hear police, they think they're supposed to open the door. And so you see in some cases in this documentary where they come in for one person and they walk out with 7 or 8 people and they just like take them. Like it's crazy to me. I didn't know that that's a lot of what was happening, and that's exactly what has been happening. And that's just with this executive order. The other thing I wanted to share, and of course, it is my hope that we're able to have a little bit of thought process and discussion with this. It was, tracing it back to how far back this entire deportation situation went. And so when it was our president, Barack Obama, I still call him my president because I refuse to call this one my president, guys. His order was actually anyone who had crimes on their rap sheet. That's who was basically under the area of deportation. What was one of the nice surprises to me was under Clinton, apparently veterans who were immigrants and still undocumented, they were good to serve this country, but then they would get deported. I don't know where I've been living that I missed that piece of information, but I saw it in this documentary and I was extremely taken aback by that. Extremely taken aback. To see veterans serving this country able to enlist, able to give their service, some maybe even die, right? That's the risk. And I know some did for sure. But if you were alive, you still were running the risk to be fully deported regardless of how many years you gave this country. And so I wanted to share this with you guys because I didn't know if you guys had seen the documentary. Totally respected if you wouldn't have, because I know plenty of people who refuse to see it. But I wanted to share with you guys just those key points and just get your thoughts on it, your commentary on it, because as you guys may know, there's a bigger problem at stake also. This has definitely increased and expanded in negativity and misfortune, I want to call it, for the immigrant community, where we still have children in cages. And in most recent news, we've heard that there are women forced to have hysterectomies who are being held, essentially caged. What are your thoughts with this? Like, I know it's overwhelming, but it's as raw as I think the platform needs to get when it comes to the situation at hand.
I since I started going to college, you just get a different education versus what you got in your public high school and your public elementary school. Everything was sort of I don't want to say kept quiet, but um, it was sort of just glazed over every decade of the history of the country. And then when you get to college, they start really dissecting every decade and what the policies were like when it came to immigration, to wars, to anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for quite a while, I've known that the United States had this policy of just becoming a lead nation, no matter whatever means necessary of becoming that lead nation, and just portray themselves as the saviors of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I never did like Clinton. I never did like Bush.
Mm.
Obama is one of the better presidents,
Okay.
but I know that even during his term, a lot of deportations happened,
Mm-hmm.
like more than when Bush was in office.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He's the
So
president with the highest number of deportations.
yes,
Yes.
He definitely laid the foundation for what we have now with Trump. I mean, the only thing that's different with him is that he wasn't so blatantly um, hateful
Mm-hmm.
towards our people.
Mm-hmm.
But presidents before, sorry to interrupt you, sister, but like presidents before, they have definitely, they haven't been as friendly as they're portrayed. We got DACA under Obama, but it was after pressure and
A
pressure
lot of
and pressure
pressure, right?
from undocumented youth.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like he woke up one day and he said, let me let me think of these undocumented kids. It was a lot of movement from like just regular undocumented kids
Mm-hmm.
that were just fed up. So yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just had to.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with that because I think, and from what I remember, we started, asking for legislation to happen since like early 2000s, I want to say. And there were marches that happened during Labor Day
Mm-hmm.
weekend that, a lot of immigrants came out and we walked and it was about the Dream Act, and it was just we're pushing for legislation that covered all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing about this government, and not just particularly under Trump, but the US government, is that they need to label every single little thing. And in labeling us, they mark us as, okay, this is the ideal immigrant,
Mm-hmm.
this is not the ideal immigrant, and they try to fit us in a box, and that's impossible to do.
Right.
And that's where they're holding on to, like, oh, but it's so hard, we can't just pass a law and legislation and help you all because this happens and this happens. And to me, it's really the core of all of this is the racism, because that's what this country has a history of, is racism.
Right.
And that's what all of this is based on, whether they like to say it or not. That is the fact, that is the reality.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just us immigrants. Black Lives Matter, they can tell you so many stories.
Absolutely. Right.
Like, everyone gets attacked, and it comes from the core of just racism
Right.
and prejudice.
Mm-hmm.
And then they go, well, like, well, you're an illegal alien, so you probably like raped somebody. They go there, but after they mark you as something other than white.
Right. Absolutely. I want to also shine light to the facts that you stated, Amelia, and absolutely, and it's interesting because it's exactly what the documentary indicates. It is under Obama that there was the most and the highest of deportation, um, and yet we could still look at him and look at all the other presidents before that, and it's like he was still like the quote unquote the nicer one to when it comes to the topic of DACA or immigration, even though those numbers were so high. I think what's going on with the labeling piece, I do think that who is in office right now has done a disgusting job
Yeah.
with the labeling. And his first label was from the very beginning that we were bad people. And I put myself in that because my parents came here as immigrants. Even though they are US
Yeah.
citizens today, I still include myself in that because at the end
Yeah.
of the day, if you read my name, my full name, we read your full names, and uh, we all originate from the same country, the
Right.
three of us. And so when we look at it from that, and at the end of the day, they look at our names or they look at us and they'll still group us together, right? Because to Bernie's point, if it's anything other than white, right, it's
Right.
a problem. It's a problem, period. End of it. I think the documentary itself is very enlightening to the reality of presidents, of all executive orders that each one put into place, of the story behind immigration and deportation. I think it's essential for people to understand it and become well educated on it. And again, I'll just make a quick mention before we dive into it in the next segment, because elections are right around the corner. And so I think it's very important and huge to all communities to understand the many movements, to Bernie's point. Essentially, this falls under racism. That's the bottom line. And if you look at the many groups that are still to this day fighting for their rights and the history in this country, right? The common problem, the common denominator is the system and the racism that's involved in it. And there is no better time to become so well educated to vote very, very smart as elections approach. Um, for me, it's it's a very rude awakening to understand in seeing some of these immigrants have that knock on the door and how startled they look and how scared they look, to hear them say, oh, you're arresting me, I have to call my boss and let them know I'm not making it to work. It's heartbreaking that in a matter of seconds, their lives just change. And all they're here for is to find a job, to provide for family. Some of their families are not here with them. Some of their families are still back home, and they're trying to bring them here to keep them safe. There is actually a story of one gentleman who ends up getting arrested to be deported, and he presents his case to them. And he tells them, how is this? Where I come from, I was an officer there. My life is on the line. I received threats because I wasn't in cahoots with the gang members back in my country. That's why I came here. And the reason why he came here, essentially, was because he was working with an NYPD officer here many years ago to help capture a lot of the gangs over here that were very similar to the ones back home in that country. And all of that he did, all of that he was good for, as an officer there and as an immigrant here, it still wasn't helping him at that moment to not get deported. It still wasn't helping him. And it was just so heartbreaking to me because I happen to come from a family of people who did come here to work. They were not bad people. They did not have rap sheets and they were not criminals. My dad essentially did not come by plane. He literally crossed the border. So he was able to at least provide a journey for my mom and my sister that was slightly different from his, a much safer one. But my dad could have died on that journey over here. There is that part of the story too, on the journeys to come to this country. And DACA essentially, there's plenty of documentaries just shining light on what DACA is and how important it is and why it should be part of an entire movement that is still to this day going on. To your point, Emilia, it was going on for a long time, for more than 10 years, I believe, fighting essentially. All these kids, they were kids gathered together, marching, kids risking their status and their lives. And they were marching for the rights of themselves, of their peers, of their communities. What is it that you would like to say to listeners? What is it that you would like to leave them with an understanding what the benefits are with DACA for people like yourself, or essentially this whole stigma surrounding immigrants? What would you like to leave them with?
Well, as far as the documentary, I haven't watched it. I don't like watching any documentaries about immigration, or I just can't.
Mm-hmm.
I get very, very triggered,
Mm-hmm.
angry, anxious. I find myself screaming at the TV. I find myself crying. It just becomes something incredibly uncomfortable because that was my reality for 20 years.
Right.
And even now, what you're describing of, like, police and ICE working together to get our people, like it happened to one of my students.
Mm.
And I was an undocumented teacher still, and she came into my classroom and she told me what happened, and we had no idea what to do.
Right.
And then, a couple of months later, she was deported with her whole family.
Oh my
And
God.
these were people that, like you say, they just come here, they come to work. She was an excellent student, and she was just taken away from us. So this low priority deportation, it just never really happened. It was like almost like a blanket over to cover the reality of what was happening behind closed doors, which was that anybody that got caught is getting pushed out.
Mm-hmm.
And that all gets tied into like the private prison industry and how it's beneficial to gather as many undocumented people as they can, have them detained, and have as many heads as possible in these prisons to
Mm-hmm.
generate money.
Mm-hmm.
So we're literally like cattle, like they're treating us like animals, and then profiting off of the separation, the suffering, the abuse that we see. And that's what gets documented. Imagine things that we are not hearing about.
Right.
Um, so I personally haven't seen it. For me, I guess a call to action for people that are listening would be yes, to get educated. I think that's really important. But I think what's most important is to check in with each other and ourselves. I think what I'm seeing happen now with the community is that we're going through a lot of mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of people are mentally struggling,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think that gets talked about enough. I don't think DACA solves any of those issues that young people are experiencing now as adults. We're crippled with freaking anxiety all the
Yes.
time, and that fear doesn't go away. And all those, memories that we have, and lack of access to actual like therapy and things like that. And then like a green card doesn't solve issues that we experience. Like I can speak for myself. I find myself with a lot of guilt because me and my sister, we were together in everything. Like ever since we came into this country, it was the same schools, the same home, obviously, the same path, the same struggles with immigration. Like we were always like, if she was taking one step, I was taking it right behind her. So, like this green card kind of like separated us a little bit in our sister journey, but I'm carrying like so much guilt,
Hmm.
right? And I don't think like green cards and like policy and like Biden in the White House or Trump in the White House can solve any of those little things that happen behind closed doors, at home, in your head, the memories that you carry. So I think I would just want to envision a world where like our undocumented people are taken care of,
Mm-hmm.
where they can access um, a healthier environment so that they can feel joy and not just suffering. Because I feel like we're categorized under suffering. You think an undocumented person equates suffering, struggle, pain, and I feel like we're so much more than that.
Mm-hmm.
Like when I think of my family, I don't think of that. I think of like love and joy and like memories and things like that. So I wish that we would, like, undocumented people would speak up more, and they would have more platforms to showcase like our stories
Mm-hmm.
in all their dimensions and all their layers, not just we came here, we struggled, we're in pain, we're struggling more, and we're still struggling. No, like I want to hear more of like who we really are as people.
Yes.
I know that was a lot, but I don't know. I think we just, I wish we had more of the mic and more resources so that we can heal,
Yeah.
because we're a hot mess.
I believe you hit it right on the nose too. Bernie, do you have anything you'd like to share for a calling, a call to action?
I think my sister pretty much said it all. I also have not seen the documentary, and that's just because it's like, taping you to a chair and here, watch your worst nightmare come
Mm-hmm.
to reality for like an hour or two.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very triggering, and I haven't gotten near it. I know what it is about, and I know that a lot of my friends have, whether they know that I'm undocumented or not, they reached out and they told me, oh, it's so good. I'm so angry. I can't believe this is happening. So I know that there's a lot of people who aren't very educated as to what's going on when it comes to immigration, because they think that immigration is this one thing,
Right.
you cross the border and now you're here.
Right.
And that's not what it is at all. Like my sister and my story, it's one of millions.
Right.
And I do agree that I do wish also that we had the platforms to share our experiences so that people really got to know who we are and what we came here to do. I mean, yes, it is true, we are abused by the system. And let me tell you, working as a paralegal, for a personal injury, I've had to deal with a lot of people who've gotten hurt in the job, working like construction jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously these people work off the books for big companies, and the companies take them because they don't have to pay taxes for them.
Exactly.
So they're taking advantage of a human being, paying them very little,
Mm-hmm.
They don't offer them health coverage. They don't offer them any kind of coverage if an accident happens.
Mm-hmm.
And then they want to just, I've had so many clients where they get injured really badly, like, broken leg, broken arm, torn shoulder, or fingers cut off.
Mm-hmm.
And they just get dropped at the hospital, and then that's it. The guy leaves.
Yeah.
And there's nobody to help them with the medical bills, and now he's out of a job because he can't walk, he doesn't have an arm, he doesn't have a leg. And and then on top of that, I get attorneys viewing it as, well, we might have a problem because he's not going to be a great witness because he's undocumented.
Mm. Right.
And I that makes me cringe, and I have to hold down my tongue and say, well, why does it even have to come up? Why does his status have to come up?
Right.
And it doesn't. Legally, they're not supposed to even ask what his status is. But now, because of Trump, we don't know what's going to happen.
Exactly.
So those many stories, I just, it makes me very, very angry, to say the least, when I hear about that. And those are the other stories that people don't know about, that people are not aware of.
Mm.
That was somebody's mom, that was somebody's dad, that was somebody's uncle. They were the providers, and now they're hurt and they can't provide and they can't get help. There's nothing available to them.
Mm-hmm.
So
Go ahead, Bernie. Go ahead.
yeah. So anyone who is listening, whether you are undocumented or not, or you're trying to find out what DACA is or what this issue really is about, I would like people to really get educated. There's a lot of law available that you can read into online, and you can really get yourself educated as to what it is, and then be very careful when election comes up with what you decide to vote for, because all these politicians, they might look great and wonderful, and they can tell you that they're going to change the world, but you have to be very careful as to who they really are,
Mm-hmm.
because you can't put them in a pedestal thinking that they're going to solve everything. They don't work alone, and sometimes they don't work for the benefit of the whole nation as it is,
Right.
just a select few, as we have seen.
Absolutely. I I appreciate you guys even calling all of that to action because there's so much society can act on. One of the things I want to make a note of really quick, we are highlighting this topic in an essence because it is Hispanic Heritage Month and it's a huge part of who I am as a person in the podcast industry. But let me be very clear on something. Although my two guests are Hispanic as I am, please understand that immigration does not discriminate to any background or any country. If you are just simply immigrant, you are their target, period. ICE targets anyone who is an immigrant, period. There was plenty of stories there of store owners, company owners, business owners of not just Hispanic heritage, other heritages too, other cultures too. The bottom line is, it didn't matter what they were doing here in this country, they were still part of the targets. So I just wanted to make that small note to my listeners, because essentially this is a problem that everyone should really pay attention to because it affects way more than just one group of people. Absolutely. I
Yes.
want to go into the last segment, and it's a newly revamped segment. It's called Overdose. And this is my quick little mini rant on something that I am completely over. While I had something in mind, very relevant to the topic we are speaking on, at the time now that we're recording, there's several things that have come up. I am completely over just how messed up our system is, where, there's so many ifs, ands, and buts about a specific case, RIP to Breonna Taylor, and the fact that no one has been brought
Mm-hmm.
to justice for
Mm-hmm.
the killing of this young woman, regardless of, the many lists of memes that are coming up of all this wrong stuff about her, labeling her, criminalizing her, as if that makes it any better that this young woman just did not get any justice. And then I want to add to that something that I saw today on the internet. And I'm sure, I don't know if you guys have heard by now, I'm sure my listeners have, that the person in office has not paid taxes for many years.
Mm-hmm.
And when he has, he's paid a very minimum because his haircut was $70,000 worth of, exemptions there. With that being said, there was a meme. I call it a meme. It was really a post by someone, and I think it was on Twitter. And it was from someone by the name of Jose Antonio Vargas. He has a blue check of some sort. So I'll be lying to you if I tell you I know exactly who he is. I don't. But the post said, so undocumented workers pay more federal income taxes than the President of the United States. The same POTUS whose rhetoric and policies have deemed us quote unquote criminals and quote unquote illegals. And the reason why I wanted to shine light on that, right, is because there's a huge community in this country that truly believes in the person who's in the White House, that truly believes in building a wall, that believes, I mean, if I'm going to be very raw at this time, let me just say this. There are plenty of people within my community who I happen to know their journey here. And it's impressive to me how quick they forgot the borders their families had to cross, the borders they may have had to cross, and how they too had to study for their citizenship. And suddenly they want a wall built. And suddenly they are wearing hats that read MAGA on it. I wanted to rant on this because, and I'm sure they're listening to it. And if they are tough, I hope they can message me privately if they have to. Or they can rate, review, and subscribe. I don't know. But I wanted to shine light on this because to the points we've been discussing so far, we really, 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 we cannot say this enough. We really need to pay attention to who you're voting for. And for what? What are they fighting for? And it's not just, oh, well, I don't want to vote for you, so let me just vote this way. Like, pay attention to your local officials. Pay attention to who is next in that office. I mean, it has gotten so terrible, and I mentioned this briefly, but I'm going to say it again, to the point that there are plenty of children in cages who are reporting plenty of mental abuse. Some of them don't even recognize their parents when they are reunited. There is definitely a whistleblower who has confirmed that there are plenty of women having hysterectomies performed. I mean, if the system in this country already has enough to say of what a woman should do with her body, that's just another cherry on top of an insult. For you to say an immigrant doesn't count here, but yet their uterus does, that is atrocious to me. And the fact is that there's a reason why we have so many movements. There's a reason, Bernie, you mentioned it before, Black Lives Matter. I mean, they have been fighting such a long fight. DACA, the youth have been fighting such a long fight. LGBTQAI has been fighting such a long fight for so many of their rights. And the bottom line is, if education is not key, please know that if there's any point in your life it should definitely be during election time. Myself included. Let me be very clear on that. Because especially now with a microphone and a platform, Emilia, to your point, I too wish that there was more microphones around in our communities, in our societies, for everyone to have a voice, so that when it's time, we don't label an immigrant to say, oh, well, we can't have them testify because they're an immigrant. They are human. They have voices. They have a story to tell too. Plenty of our youth and our children who have crossed that border had no choice, absolutely none. And so it does not make any sense to me that we are just going to put them into cages and to violate a woman's body. That's the reality of a lot of the history in this country. It's the reality of a lot of the abuse going on to many groups of people, of communities, of demographic, that if you just were not white, you were not right. And I just wanted to rant off on that and leave that on that quick note, because a lot of toxicity falls into repeated cycles. And at some point, you need to break that. And if you don't, it's only a matter of time before it affects every single person in existence. And so I am really starting to see how a lot of these terrible, terrible movements from this system, this government in this country are slowly repeating itself slowly between different communities. And I think if I have a call to action, is really calling on all these groups to really unify and to really support one another with each of their movements. And yeah, is there anything else you guys would like to say?
Yeah, actually, in terms of like the platforms, right? I was just thinking about it back in when my sister and I were in college.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's true that we're not giving the platforms that we need,
Mm-hmm.
but we definitely made the platforms for ourselves.
Mm.
Because I remember when we were pushing for DACA, a lot of young kids were out there putting their safety, their lives at risk, and probably the safety and the lives of their
Family.
families. And they were out there with a megaphone, with anything they could find, just talking about their experience, their lives, and who they are, so that the people listening could have a different view and a different definition of immigrant, right? And even in college, and this goes back to the point that you made, Daisy, where immigrants or illegal immigration and us is not just uh, geared towards Latinos
Mm.
or Latinx,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's people from all over the world. And I remember when I was in college, we started a Dream Act kind of group, and we started as a club, and we would just get together to give each other that emotional support.
Right.
And I can't tell you, I had people from India, people from the Philippines that would walk in and kind of like look around and see what's up, see, like, look at our faces and see if it was safe to walk in. And then as soon as we started sharing our story and sharing who we were, they got very comfortable and they were very grateful that at least they had someone that understood what they were going through
Mm-hmm.
as young adults, trying to get their careers going, and doing it day by day because you didn't know what was going to happen the next day.
Right.
So we can definitely build those platforms. It's gonna be hard. It has been hard, but we at least can support each other as a community.
That's right.
And
Absolutely.
I just wanted to say that because it's not all, dark and gray, right? Like, we can definitely give each other that support that we so desperately need. Just this weekend, I was hanging out with some friends from my church, and they were planning something. Oh, when COVID is over, let's just plan a trip. Let's go to Mexico. Let's go to whatever. And I'm there like, and I remember when I was in college and my friends were planning trips for like spring break and I couldn't go anywhere. I remember saying, oh, well, I don't think my parents are going to let me, or I might not have the money for it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I remember coming up with excuses.
Mm-hmm.
And then this past weekend, I was just very honest and I said, I can't travel because if I do, I can't come back. I'm undocumented. I can't come back. And the girl next to me, her reaction was like, oh my God, so am I. And she gave me a
Wow.
hug because
Wow.
she hadn't been able to say that. And let me tell you, just that and that human interaction, especially at this time, I know it made her feel so much better and so much lighter. So we can definitely be there for each other, especially now.
You gave me goosebumps with the girl next to you saying her too. Imagine,
Yeah.
I can only imagine. I just hear it right now in your voice, just how liberating that sounded, to be able to share that and have another person in the room know exactly what you mean and
Yes.
what you feel, and it's amazing. I think that is definitely another call to action that,
Yeah.
there are safe spaces. You just have to find them or you could build them. There are safe spaces.
Yes.
And it goes back definitely to finding that other person regardless of where they're from, but if they share your story, join forces, be each other's support, be there for one another, and understand that everyone, I think a lot of people are walking around this earth with their own struggles, whether it's
Hmm.
because they're part of a group or whether it's their own individuals. And there's just so much to just being kind to a person because you don't know what they're going through. You don't know what they feel like, whether it's something directly affecting them or it's something that, to the point of you guys saying very transparently, I can't watch that documentary because it would be a trigger. And it's true.
Hmm.
It would be a trigger. And I think that's where, for me, I've encouraged people to watch the documentary. I essentially encouraged my son to watch it with me and my nephews. And because I wanted them to understand a little bit more of how we're here, of the story of their grandma and grandpa, with my nephews, the story of their mom. There were plenty of 2 year olds in that documentary that came here with no choice, and so was their mom at 2 years old. So I feel like education is key, and I think that it is essentially for the right people because for too many, it is still a trigger. It is. Like, I don't think I could sit there and have my mom watch that because I think it will be too much of a trigger for her. I don't think my dad could watch that because that would be too much of a trigger for him.
I agree. I mean, I have a lot of I don't know why the universe does this to me, but I have a lot of students now that are undocumented and they come to me for advice. And, I'm a 30-year-old woman, like I'm their teacher. They look at me and they see an adult and I don't have answers.
Yeah.
I don't want to tell them it gets easier. I don't want to tell them it'll be okay because, when I was their age, it didn't really get better, you know? But I do tell them there is power in community. There is power in being brave. Or when you cannot be brave, you fall back on community. But it really
Mm-hmm.
is, I think I've accepted the fact that it's going to be for life, like
Yeah.
healing through everything that happened and encountering new struggles within like this change. I think it's just going to take a lifetime, and I feel like accepting that kind of feels better because I don't know if you felt this, sister, but I think like growing up, I felt like, okay, if this happens, it'll get better. And if something else happens, like, well, get over that. If we move out to a better apartment, it'll be nicer. And we'll be okay. But like every time there's something that is always coming up, right? So I think it's just a matter of like taking it day by day. Like that's really what I tell them. And I think that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Taking it day by day. I like that. I like that. Because you know what? You're not giving any expectations that you don't want to paint a picture that's not really there. Yet you also don't want to shatter anything for them either, to be honest. Yeah. I once again that level of transparency is needed for a lot of the youth that is trusting you and is turning to you for this level of help. And I think for one last call, if there are any teachers, especially during these difficult times and this new world our teachers are living through with the children, I think that if you're dealing with any kids too who still have this as a struggle, if they are undocumented, please keep that in mind. And please know that a lot of them see you as their parent or their second home, and they really need their teachers too. Honestly, if I may just do that calling. Okay. All right. I want to thank you guys again for coming on this platform. I'm going to be super duper honest with you. It has taken every single part of me and my dry mouth right now, just holding back a lot of emotions because I can hear it in you guys' voices and I can see it in you, Emilia, that it's something that is still too close. And we could just continue to dream and to hope that things could take a turn for the better for the immigration community. All right. Well, this was an interesting episode. It was a pleasure having you both here. And to my listener, this was another week and another episode on Double Dose of Raw Talk Podcast. I am your host, Misty, and you guys will tune in next week. Bye. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and Twitter. And we are streaming on all platforms. Check us out on Apple and Spotify. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Now let's talk about it.